energy analysts are warning that Eskom's power grid shows no signs of recovery and that load shedding is likely to remain or even worsen over the short term. Recently, the Eskom CEO, as you heard, they hinted that load shedding is due to sabotage by staff, angering unions. We're joined by Cosatu's Parliamentary Coordinator, Matthew Parks, OUTA's CEO, Wayne Duvenage, and Ghaleb Cachalia, who's a DA member of Parliament. Good evening to all of you, and thank you so much for your time tonight. I think perhaps just to get a broad sense of where each of you believes we are when it comes to the stability of the power supply in this country, and having listened to what the Eskom CEO and some of the senior management at Eskom had to say this afternoon, are you feeling any more encouraged about the situation? Matthew, I'll begin with you.
Well, look, I mean, we've been in this spot, for the last 15 years, since 2006. I think we know the reasons are complex. There are many reasons. It's not a question of one single factor. So we have a neglect of having failed to invest in new generation capacity in the late 1990s, early 2000s. We also have a legacy of very old, aging power stations which are not sufficiently maintained or invested in. We've got a serious problem of corruption, wasteful expenditure. I think we've seen countless articles even today about how many people at Eskom are stealing from Eskom, how outside suppliers are providing shoddy support to Eskom, etc. So I think we are in a very difficult situation because there can be no economic recovery if businesses can't work, if companies are not aware of when they can work and when they can't work. For many workers, like for example in the restaurants, there's no work, no pay. So this is a huge hardship. We are also in the midst of a pandemic, of a recession. So we're not going to get out of this recession. We're not going to be able to reduce our 44% unemployment rate unless we fix Eskom. So really this is the nation's #1 crisis. It's a crisis not only Eskom's leadership must sort out, but in fact, the buck will stop with the president. He also needs to ensure that Eskom has fixed the bottom line. And for us, we can have all the promises, all the commitments. What we need to see is a clear analysis of what's wrong so we can come up with the right solutions to fix those problems.
Mr. Cachalia?
What we have here is a problem statement and a solution statement that's required. We're all aware of the problem statement. The problem statement involves paucity of skills, oversized and inept management structures, and an embedded culture of theft and entitlement, the failure of cadre deployment, stifling procurement systems, an inability to secure reliability, bloated costs, shoddy design, construction, an inability to commission, test, manage, and finance projects, or to manage basics like frequency, reactive power, and voltage control. I could go on. This is a nightmare that has been building over more than a decade. In terms of solutions, at the 11th hour, sadly, because it should have been addressed before, what we need to do is secure the base load. We need to fast-track IPP, independent power producers, into the system, which involves battery storage as well. We need to look at combined gas cycle turbines and how we can plug this into the system. None of these are overnight. So we have a problem here, but we have to look at how we deal with the base load. That involves, in the interim, diesel availability, and the cost and the contracts attendant to that need to be placed before us all, because there's been criminality and there's ongoing criminality in that regard. So we need to do that. And then we can look at maintenance, reliability maintenance, philosophical maintenance, and all these wonderful terms which we are presented with, while we attend to things like flue gas desulfurization, which is required in our coal plants, so that we can move forward with international compliance. And key to this is the P word, privatization, because the state has patently failed to achieve this. Now let's give the private sector a chance to assist here. If it were the other way around, I'd agree as well. Tomorrow I will sit on the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee, and I'll die again by PowerPoint, listening to what could have been done, what should have been done, and what purportedly is being done. It's all nonsense. These things have to be addressed in the manner that I've just said.
Mr. Duvenage?
Yeah, look, and I think Ghaleb and Matthew have said a lot of it, but in the short, we can continue with this blame game, but we need to find the solutions. And our problem is too much political interference. In 2019, when the president came back from Egypt in a hurry because we were in stage 6 load shedding back then at the end of 2019, the risk mitigation REAP program, the renewable independent power producers strategy, had to be fast-tracked. If we had that fast-tracked, we wouldn't have this problem today. If Medupi and Cachalia were on board and built on time, not even talking about the 200 to 300 billion rand wasted over the budget spent, we wouldn't have to shut down Medupi, which is operating at 60% capacity and efficiency, which Cachalia should have been online a few years ago, is operating at 25% capacity. So, this knee-jerk reaction to blame the current board and kick them in the teeth because of this current situation, I'm not for 1 minute condoning the dire situation we're in. I'm saying that is a knee-jerk reaction that will make matters worse. We need to fix it. But we have a team that is professional, that is there doing their best they can. And they've inherited a broken system, and they're trying to fix it. And now to call for their heads, well, then you've got to call for Gwede Mantashe's head, because he has not put 1 single kilowatt hour of energy into the system in the last 2 years, and he was tasked to do so to mitigate this current risk. So, what is happening in that space? It can be resolved. It's not going to happen overnight. But let's get civil society, let's get the role players, the stakeholders together and fix it, because this discussion was held in 2019. We sit here 2 years later, nothing has happened. We have a problem with implementation, and there's too much political interference.
Wayne, what do you mean when you talk about political interference? Give me examples of what has happened over the last 2-3 years since 2019 that you believe has contributed to the state of Eskom not changing because there has been political interference.
We'll just look at the issue around bringing in renewables and independent power producers. People have been queuing. If we had started this process and given the go-ahead long ago, we would have had a lot of that power already into the system. It's not there. That is politics. The whole IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, took years to get done. In that resource plan is about how we take off stream old power stations and bring on the new. This is about political stalling. This is about the coal car power ships. There's political interference there and meddling. Not saying we want to go with that. There are issues around that. If you look at Eskom 2 years ago, had to deal with its bloated labor costs. It had to deal with serious issues, and the politicians tapped them on the shoulders and told them no, because it's not good for the elections. This is the type of stuff that happens, and this is why throughout the Zuma era, where there was gross political interference, by the way, we have this current problem that we have now. So we really need politicians to let the people get on with running this critical state and entity. And I think, as Ghaleb said, bring in the independent power producers, get the business people who understand running complex businesses like this to do it properly, and not the state, because the state has got a dire history of running SOEs.
Matthew, do you believe that there has been any hindrance to bringing people who are skilled and who are capacitated to handle this problem into the power utility? I'm reminded again of the briefing that Minister Pravin Gordhan had about 2 weeks back, if I'm not mistaken, with the Eskom CEO. In that meeting, it was said that, well, they identified the fact that they didn't have the right kind of skills, and they would now be looking outside of South Africa's shores to bring in people who are skilled enough. So in as far as political interference is concerned, do you believe what Wayne is saying is part of the problem, that there has been the involvement of politicians that has hindered the current board and CEO from doing their work?
Look, I think during the previous administration, up until 2018, I think it's quite common knowledge, there was a significant amount of political interference in Eskom. I think that's partly why Eskom is in the mess it is in today, because politicians interfere in its appointment of boards, of senior management. Politicians had their hands in contracts, and we're now reaping the result of a Eskom which was deliberately destroyed by previous administration's politicians. But also not just that, there are people from the private sector who have also had their hands in the cookie jar. You have about 2,000 coal trucks bringing coal to Eskom every day, and you have continuous reports about sometimes some of these private suppliers mix stones with the coal. Many of the contracts given to the private sector for maintenance, etc., often the quality of work done by them is so poor. There is also instances of collusion between some plant managers and the relatives who then get maintenance contracts, and they deliberately allow power stations to be neglected, to collapse, because the brothers or the sisters or the sons will get their contracts, lucrative contracts. But I think there is also a correct point that the minister made. As you mentioned, we have seen a significant brain drain of skilled workers from Eskom over the years who have gone to better paying jobs overseas. We need to really make sure how to bring them back and to do so quickly. Part of Eskom's social compact was really to assess where the skills gaps, how do we fill them. We also saw previously there was a bloated management at Megawatt Park, where there are too many managers there, and they need to be redeployed to the power stations themselves. And we need to make sure we have a proper skills audit so we know what needs to be filled where. But simply operating in a crisis mode doesn't take any of us anywhere.
Mr. Cachalia, you were speaking about how you're going to be sitting in some of the parliamentary sessions and basically hearing the same old thing being repeated. And that's part of the difficulty that South Africans face. So I hear the argument on the political interference and how it has led us to this point. But the reality is that the opportunity for the current board and the CEO was to make things better going forward. One doesn't get a sense of the fact that that is in fact what is happening. Mr. Cachalia, I'd like you to weigh in on that, and please go ahead and correct me if I'm wrong.
For better or for worse, we've got a senior management team which was brought in to fix the situation. The CEO is a competent man in terms of project management and finance, and he was brought in from another industry, Nampak. He knew nothing about electricity, frankly. The COO who was elevated to that position comes from wires, from a transmission perspective. He knows very little really about generation. And we have a plethora of this misappropriation of people. For better or worse is what we've got. When I took on this portfolio, I said at the beginning that we needed to bring in the Red Adair of the energy business to deal with this. We haven't done so. We have lost very key people from Ian McRae's dream team, if you like, who set this thing right, and it's been going wrong ever since. People who knew about design and construction, who knew about commission, who knew about operation and management, who knew about all those key things. There are very few people who you can tick all those boxes at senior management. In McRae's time, they were there. We don't have it now. Now we're faced with this skills deficit, and we need to fix it. We can't fix it overnight. We can't just chuck them out. And some of them are doing their best under the circumstances within the confines of their skills and their knowledge. But it needs additional people to come in. And it's not about deploying cadres or bringing people in from existing functions, because the existing functions within the organizations have been depleted. We need to have done this some time ago, like many things in Eskom. We haven't. Now what are we going to do now? It's too little, too late. But as Wayne says, it can be addressed, and it needs to be addressed. You know, in California, there's a permanent commission of electricity that sits in place. It's independent, and it deals with the problems that they have, and they had some very serious problems. We do not have that. In the distant past, when Eskom first had problems, there was the De Villiers Commission which was set up, and that put it back on track. We've never done these things. We have just put out plans, 5-year plan by 5-year plan, which has got us into this parlous state. It's time to change that.
Mr. Duvenage, let me bring you in here. So one of the challenges about where we are right now is that even when you listen to Eskom's executives, there doesn't seem to be a clear sense of when we are going to get out of the situation that we are in as far as timelines and timeframes are concerned, but also just a simple question like, what kind of load shedding can we expect this evening? Can we expect tomorrow? Is not something that they're able to provide concrete answers on. Surely that is something that falls within the imperative of the current management to be able to answer on, given the fact that they're the ones that are analyzing the situation and must have a clear understanding of what's wrong.
Yes, it should be the case, and it normally would be in a situation where you had good supply and good product and good plant. But Eskom at the moment is being held together by elastic bands and sellotape. Now, I'm being a bit facetious when I say that, but this is very old plant. And when you try and maintain this fleet, which, by the way, was neglected for 10 years, I'm not saying there was no maintenance, but it was well below where it should have been. And you try and take down a plant and you've got no spare capacity and another one trips, or what happened recently with the Kabora Bassa line for 1,000 megawatts goes down for a few hours and it now starts to trigger your pump storage and you lose that capacity for to keep you in level stage 1 or 2. I mean, it's a domino effect. And so you've got a broken system which you're trying to hold together and no spare capacity. Had we had the spare capacity through independent power producers, another 3,000, 4,000 megawatts, which should have been online by today in the last number of years, this problem wouldn't be here. So we can keep looking back and say, why are we in this situation? But what we don't seem to learn is how do we stop the talking and the blaming and fix it now once and for all. So yes, they should be able to give us a good idea. And I think that's what they did try and do. And they said, you know, within 18 months, if everything goes according to plan, we should be out of the woods largely. But we're not there yet because things happen. And it's not easy to run a broken ship. It's sinking. It's been sinking for a long time. Just to keep it afloat is a nightmare.
So I think South Africans are yes, the ones who do the talking, but ultimately it's up to Eskom and its officials to do the fixing. The entire country is relying on them right now, and the more that we have these blackouts, the more the sense that they're not meeting their end of the bargain begins to prevail.
Yeah, and let's not scapegoat. Of course, they need to give us a little bit more surety. They need to have their plans and their projections. But at the same time, I think we need to ask the Minister of Energy, what are we doing? When will new energy come on board? How are we going to mitigate the current risk? Because a lot of that sits in his lap. So we don't sit here in a year's time having level 4 and level 5 and level 6 breakdowns again because we didn't implement. 2 years have gone past us as risk mitigation program was put in place. We still don't have any additional power. That's a sad situation to be in.
Matthew,
we've got to fix that now.
Sure. Let me give you a chance to come in here, Matthew, and perhaps if you can also weigh in. We, of course, had the Eskom officials acknowledging the fact that there was a go-slow just about a week or 2 weeks ago, particularly centered in Gauteng of some staff members, but that has been resolved. We've heard coming out of the ANC specifically allegations of sabotage, of decampaigning the ANC ahead of the elections. All of that also contributes to, you know, whether or not we end up with power. Solidarity coming out today to say Eskom workers are, you know, they're disgruntled, and that the morale in the organization is very, very low because they keep being blamed for the problems that the power utility is facing, and they believe unfairly so.
No, sure. And look, I mean, I don't want to get into the political conspiracy theories. I think for us, we need to get a proper diagnosis from Eskom, from government, to say what exactly are the problems and speak to the key thematic areas. What is the maintenance situation? What is the impact upon generation there? What is our plan to ramp up maintenance? What is our plan to fast-track new investments in generation capacity? Because we're having a shortage not just now of about a third of the generation capacity, but that's going to get worse in the next few years up until 2030 when a third of Eskom generation capacity comes off grid. So we need to deal with the crisis of today, but also to avoid further crises down the road. We need to see what are they doing to plug the holes, because you'll see continuous reports in the media about people being implicated, whether it's management, whether it's staff, whether it's contractors or suppliers, in corruption, in pilferage, etc. And all of these have a huge impact upon Eskom. So it's not just one single thing. I don't think anyone can really buy the political conspiracy or sabotage story. We had that same allegation in 2006 about a missing bolt at Kuberg. But I think what we're really seeing here is a failure to invest in new generation capacity. As Wayne has said, we're trying to bring life into very old, aging power stations. Some of them are as old as 60, 70 years, and many of them just simply have reached the end of the lifespan. And of course, when you're dealing with very old assets, many small things can cause a calamity. But I think what the nation needs right now, and I don't think it's unrealistic, give us a proper diagnosis. What is the problem? What is the roadmap to get us out of this crisis? And for government, and I think for the president to put pressure on cabinet, on the management of Eskom, etc., whatever the plans are, we need to fast track them, because everything else we do as a country, from ramping up local procurement to trying to create jobs, to deal with the vaccines and the pandemic, those will all be sabotaged if we can't sort out electricity. We can't attract investors, local or international, if we don't seem to have an economy with reliable and affordable electricity. So we need many moving blocks to be adjusted at once. But I think also government needs to assist Eskom. And we've made this offer as well when we drafted the Eskom social compact 2 years ago. Let's assist Eskom to reduce its debt burden so it can focus more on maintenance, more on investment in generation capacity. I think, Kathy, in the midst of kind of, difficult news, we have had an indication of some positive news last week when the president announced that we've been able to secure a commitment to bring about 130 billion rand of investments in new generation capacity for Eskom in the renewable energy sphere. So let's bring this forward, but we need for Eskom itself to take us into the confidence and not for us to play guessing games outside.
All right. Mr. Cachalia, I'll give you the final word on this conversation.
130 billion rands is not going to solve the situation tomorrow. Those things have lead times. We need to solve the situation tomorrow, and we need to put the urgent steps in place to do so. If we don't do so, we are hiding to nothing, as Matthew has said, in terms of the economy. We will not emerge from this. This is a disastrous situation, second to none, and it has to be all hands on deck. Ideologies need to be put in people's back pockets. The right people have to be put in place. With regard to labor issues, you know what? All electricity generation stations are national key points and are and they override labor laws in that regard. We need to move with speed and sort this out. And then when we've done that, you will invite us all round the next time to deal with Transnet, which is the next nightmare that we're going to face.
Yeah, unfortunately, the list certainly does not get any shorter in terms of SOEs that need urgent intervention. Let me thank you all for your time tonight. Cosatu's Parliamentary Coordinator, Matthew Parks, OUTA CEO, Wayne Duvenage, and DA Member of Parliament, Ghaleb Cachalia.